Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, and this is the Gardening Quandaries segment, episodes, whatever we're going to call these. We're not sure. We're just kicking them off here. But these are your homeowner questions that come into the office, and we're going to be answering these in these short little bits that we will be posting online for you to hopefully answer some questions that you might be having in your very own garden and landscape. So, Wendy, producer of the Good Growing Podcast, if you wouldn't mind reading off these questions, please.
It would be my pleasure. Our first question is about tomatoes and peppers. They have some, like a lot of us, got a little excited about putting out plants, and now the weather is not cooperating, and we might have some 40-degree weather coming up. What should we do?
So I would say if you haven't put them out yet, wait until we are consistently getting lows are in the 50s consistently. If it gets dropping down into the 40s, that'll set the plants back. Tomatoes, peppers, those type of things like warm soils.
So the other thing that I'm thinking about with if you have already planted your tomatoes, what should we do then in that regard?
So I know there's some products like Wall of Water, where it's basically a bunch of tubes you fill with water and you can put those around your plants. Water will absorb heat during the day and slowly release that at night, and that'll bring that temperature up around your plants. You could try covering them, put a 5-gallon bucket or something like that over them as well. Use something to kind of trap that heat with those plants, keep them a little warmer than they would be otherwise.
So like cutting off the bottom of a gallon milk jug, plastic milk jug, would that work?
Yep, that would work. Make sure you put the lid back on so all the air doesn't go up the top. But
well, I think the thing, like Wendy said, everyone gets so anxious. Like in Central Illinois, it is, what's the date? The holiday, which we typically are not supposed to recommend holidays, but usually it's Mother's Day in Central Illinois. We say, all right, after like the May 10th-ish, you can plant things outside. But remember, I think it was in 2020, we had a frost event. Was it May 11th last year? Or it was late. It was after the final freeze date that we normally have. Just because, we say you can plant out May 10th or Mother's Day does not necessarily mean you are still going to be immune from a late frost or freeze.
I'd say then usually you want to wait another week or two after you plant tomatoes for peppers, because they really like warm temperatures. And if you get them out a little early, they'll just sit there and do nothing for maybe a few weeks until it gets warm enough, and then they'll start growing on you.
Okay, with the cold weather, we've gotten some questions about plants that have black and brown foliage. Is that from the cold temperatures we had like a week or so ago? Or could it be? Or something else nefarious going on?
It depends, right? Right, everybody?
We've kind of had some
It's
cool,
complicated
wet weather.
and it depends.
Right.
So I'll say, I know in my yard, on some of the smaller trees and shrubs that we planted last year, that frost we had was a week or two ago. Those plants had just started sending out some new foliage. And you can see a lot of that, especially on the tips and the margins, is kind of burned brown and black. So I have a feeling that's why a lot of this stuff, it had new growth. It wasn't really all that hardy. It was real nice and soft, succulent growth. And it just kind of got nipped by those freezes. And that stuff will die off and they'll send out new leaves. So really, assuming it's the frost, that's really nothing to worry about.
Yeah, generally speaking, we're seeing a little bit of leaves that have a little bit nipped on the margins there. So that could be with the frost. So, someone might say, oh, well, could it be like a, moisture, too much moisture, some type of rot or something? But I don't know. I feel like it's been fairly dry so far this spring. If everyone here has kind of seen that same trend here in West Central Illinois, or is it, what's the moisture like for us?
So I've been tracking the moisture, and I think we're approximately 2 inches above where we were last year. And I think we were probably spot on last year. So, 2 inches isn't a lot, but we have been a little bit more moist than we have been in the past year.
And I'll say if it is a disease, that's going to more than likely continue to spread. With a freeze, you get that initial damage, and that's not going to spread. So if it's, that blackened area, that brown area on those leaves, if that's not getting any bigger, I would lean more towards frost or some other abiotic. Whereas if it's spreading to other plants, or those spots are enlarging on those plants, then you may want to think more disease issue.
Okay, so for some of our perennial vegetable crops, say like rhubarb or asparagus, what should we be looking for with those? Is it okay to harvest after we've had a freeze like this?
Well, Martha Smith, who will be a guest on the podcast here in the future, she routinely says, when in doubt, throw it out. When you're dealing with rhubarb and it undergoes some type of a freeze event, that oxalic acid that's in the leaf moves down into that petiole or the stalk of that plant. And that can be toxic to humans. So, that's why we say avoid that. A lot of times you'll see that frost damage, a wilted or mushy stem. But you follow the safest precautions as you can, and, when in doubt, throw it out, as Martha would say.
And then we have a question about cedar apple rust ID. How do you know what it is, and what should they do about it?
So it's very unique looking. It kind of reminds me of like those balls that we'd have as a kid, with like all the little spikes on it. But yeah, it's interesting, and as the name suggests, it's like a rust color. And so this person had found it in their cedar tree. And it's not something that's going to kill the tree, but it will spread over time. So if you don't want it to just kind of have like a Frankenstein or a Halloween tree, you may decide to cut those out to prevent it from spreading, because over time it'll dry out and spread spores, which is just going to make it worse. And so if you wanted to, you could cut those galls out. You could also just leave them if that's what you want to do. So this person, it was an older tree, and so he was going to cut out the galls that were closest to the ground and leave the ones in the upper canopy, as he couldn't really easily reach that. They do have fungicides available. I don't know, Chris and Ken, if you know how effective the fungicides are. Some papers I had read suggested not wasting the time or money on the fungicide, but I have no experience with it, so I can't really speak.
I'd say for the cedars, if you were going to spray those, that would be more in the summer and fall. We need to be doing that. Kind of the big issue with cedar apple rust is when it gets on apple trees and crab apples. So that's one of those diseases that needs two different hosts to complete its life cycle. So this time of year, we're finding those galls on those cedar, like you mentioned, Katie. Then those spores they're releasing, that's going to the apple trees, the crab apples, stuff like that. And those will cause typically yellow spots on the leaves. You may have a red halo or margin around those spots. And that can cause, if you're growing apples and stuff, that can cause some issues with your yield and stuff. So you could spray for that, with apple trees, especially for homeowners, typically recommend finding resistant cultivars for that. Try to avoid some of those issues off the bat with that stuff.
But if you're gonna have the juniper this in your yard, absolutely worth leaving it if you don't care if it infects your apples or crab apples, because I think that's the coolest thing ever. It's like some alien has laid its eggs on your tree. It's so weird looking. I had them on my Taylor junipers in my backyard, and it was all kind of scattered throughout the canopy there, and they're smaller trees, so I just pulled them off by hand, but I left a couple because I wanted to see them turn into that gelatinous blob with all of those tendrils or telomeres, whatever you call them, popping out. Is really neat. Yeah.
What does it feel like? I feel like it would just feel like snot.
Like a dry snot, I think.
That's cool.
You could tell you're a parent.
Yes. Kids, come look at this. Touch it. See what it tastes like. No, don't eat it. Don't eat it.
No, don't eat it.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
And then our last question is, we have a homeowner who wants to spray their lawn with 2,4-D, and they want to know if it will kill their hostas.
So if you spray your hostas, there's a good chance you're going to kill them. But if you stay away from the hostas, you should be pretty okay. So we'll use 2,4-D to control broadleaf species in our lawn. So our buckhorn plantain, our dandelions. And so hostas are also considered or are in the broadleaf family. And so actually in the plantain family, which if we're killing buckhorn plantain, we're probably going to kill our hostas as well. So if you can avoid spraying your hostas or getting too close to them, that would be a good idea if you want to keep your hostas around.
Yeah, never forget those ornamental plants. A lot of them are broadleafs along with the trees out there. So, but does 2,4-D, is that the one that also has a risk of volatilizing? So if you spray it on like a hot day, would it like turn into a vapor and move? Is that one of those?
Yeah, I think it has the potential, but I don't think it's quite as bad as dicamba.
Okay.
But a lot of times if you buy, well, you can buy 2,4-D on its own, but a lot of times like our lawn or our weed lawn control herbicides that are pre-mixed that you can buy at a box store. A lot of times it'll have 2,4-D and dicamba in it. So you really have to be careful with that too.
Yeah,
Or you
and this
could
time of year
embrace
it's
the
not.
weeds.
And this time of year it's not too big of an issue with that volatilizing. It's more of a when we start getting into summer when it gets warm. A lot of times when we start getting over 80, 85 degrees, that's when it really starts becoming an issue.
You should always read your label, and you should not spray on a windy day, because that can have issues as well.
Or let's get on Wendy's page here, right, Wendy? And
My
embrace
naturalist
the weed.
hat.
Yes. Yes. Let me put on my other hat here. Yep. Oh yeah. Pollinator source. There you go. Dandelions, creeping Charlie. It's all good stuff out there. Unless it's an invasive species, then it's bad stuff.
Then just pull it out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that was a lot of good information on a couple questions that are coming into our extension office. So Wendy, Katie, and Ken, thank you so much for helping answer these questions. And we shall see folks next week with another round of Gardening Quandaries.